Okay, hello and welcome again to the GigCX Decoded podcast, where we dive into the world of gig-based customer service, or GigCX. The podcast is brought to you by none other than Limitless, which is the world's leading GigCX platform, and I can say that because I'm your host, Chris Dumpleton. I'm the Chief Sales Officer here at the good ship Limitless, and on this podcast we are going to explore the world of GigCX, which for those of you that have been living under a rock for the last 2 years is what we use to determine the concept of routing customer inquiries, digital customer inquiries, to crowds of customers who can resolve these questions. Now, these people are typically made up of brands' own customers, so we're connecting customers with customers, and that's what we call GigCX. And today, I'm joined by Nick Clark, partner at Boston Consulting Group. Nick helps brands transform customer service, who brings loads of experience in operations. The knowledge that Nick has got is going to be really informative on this show. We're glad to have you here, Nick. Love to have you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, great to be here. And thanks everyone for listening.
So this podcast is all about the annual report that Limitless produces, which covers off a breadth of information around GigCX. We hear from experts, industry leaders, people that are using GigCX, and Nick was very kind enough to contribute to that report, which was the third one that we've done, and it looks into the current state and the views of GigCX in the global industry. It's a most engrossing epistle, dare I be so bold, and it's on the website. If you go to limitlesstech.com, you can download it and get into all the detail there. But today we're going to get Nick's perspective on that and hopefully a bit more of a conversation about the topics that that you covered off in all of that. So before we do that, it's probably obligatory that our listeners get an understanding of you and what you do at Boston Consulting Group, Nick.
Well, thanks. Yeah. So give a very brief intro. I have spent my entire 20-year career working in customer service. And I actually started out on the phones. I worked in the complaints department of a water company. The first bit of feedback I had from my supervisor was that I was good at handling customers because she said I sounded like a game show host. and I'm still never sure if that was really a compliment or what, but it served me well at the time. And then from that pretty inauspicious start, I worked my way up through a few organizations and then spent roughly 15 years, leading customer service teams in industry, mostly in telecoms companies, and then latterly kind of leading transformation programs within those companies as well. And that's what got me into contact with consulting. And I thought, well, that's great. You get to do all the change and see the latest things and work on the latest things. And so for the past 5 years, I've been doing that at Boston Consulting Group, and people may or not have heard of us. We're perhaps most well known as a kind of strategy consulting firm, so advising C-level executives on big business decisions. But increasingly, we do a lot more work in operations, and particularly that I focus on, which is customer service, customer experience, and yeah, I help companies across the world transform their customer service, thinking quite holistically, so covering technology, AI, automation, those sorts of things, but also a lot of the human side, so operating models and ways of working within organizations. And I suppose that's one of the reasons Gig is really interesting, because it is the intersection of both the technology and the people to create something that's quite new in this space.
Absolutely. Well, tell me a bit more about your first ever job on the phones then. So you were handling complaints for a water company.
Yeah, I mean, I think it got me to realize from an early age a very important lesson in customer service, which is the role. Customer service really sits at it's the backstop for sort of everything that goes on in an organization. So anything that went wrong, or anything within their processes anywhere across that organization that wasn't working as it should, would end up in customer service and ultimately would end up in complaints. So most of the time, it was mostly people complaining because a technician had dug up their expensive brickwork driveway in order to install a water meter.
Right.
But I think, and that's why the charming game show voice would help sometimes when people have got a bill of few £100 to get that fixed. I think what I learned was, often customer service is often relied upon to solve things that should probably have been solved much, earlier on in a business's operations and how it runs and its propositions to its customers. And so that just started out a fascination for, there's different and better ways to do this, and we can build better models to make things work better for customers and better for employees.
There we go. I mean, my first ever job was also in a contact center. It's funny how, probably not too dissimilar time on, we've both moved on and we end up still in the same sort of industry, but obviously coming at it from a very different angle. And back in those days, it was only voice. There wasn't any other channels kicking around at that time.
Yeah.
And I think even IVRs are pretty basic. So it was just a big funnel of anything that came in. So you had to be trained on pretty much how to handle anything that arrived at your door. So having your charming game show host, accent has been able to help people navigate and solve it. Must have paid you dividends.
It was a great experience, actually. Certainly looking back on it now. But I think, you must find it as well. I think it's helpful to have actually done the job on the front line, because then you do understand sometimes, the pressures that people are under when they're doing a job like that. Often you can't predict what your workload is going to be like today. You don't know what the next call is going to be like. Is it going to be an easy one? Is it going to be a real challenge? You're being measured, on a big scorecard of a dozen different things. And I guess if you were in a sales role, I don't know, where you've got some pretty stringent targets there that you have to hit. So, it's useful to be able to empathize with people who are in those sorts of roles when you're thinking about, well, how do we make, making quite radical changes sometimes to how they're going to be working.
Well, I didn't tee you up for that, but you've touched on something that's probably one of the biggest benefits of GigCX, if we segue into that more specifically, which is around empathy, right? So when you say it helps us in this industry, because we've been in that position, what GigCX is doing is connecting people who've got questions with people that have got answers, who are typically people that are customers. They've been in those shoes, so they can empathize straight away, and that bears a completely different relationship. And I struggle to find anybody that would just say, and if you ask them the $1 million question, would you rather talk to somebody who has got your product and service, or would you rather not? It stands to reason most people are going to say, well, yes, I'd like to. And if you then ask the second question, which is why, which is because they probably understand more about what I've got and what and the potentially even the problems that may have occurred with it, so they can empathize. And empathy seems to be this sort of ethereal, mythical metric. It's very hard to objectively go, there's the dial. It's not an NPS. It's not an, how do you quantify it? How do you help organizations to sort of realize why that's important?
Well, I think empathy is incredibly important at the moment. I think, empathy and trust, which is perhaps, an extension of that. Trust, I think, is even more abstract. Like, that's a really hard thing to measure, certainly in the short term. But where we see that empathy comes in as being really important, I say especially at the moment, because one other reason that I really like working in customer service is that I believe that customer service is often a reflection of what's going on in society as a whole. It's where companies and organizations meet their customers in the real world, like no holds barred.
Right.
And the world at the moment is quite an uncertain place. Like, a lot of customers have a lot of financial uncertainty, which means they need help, maybe which is beyond what they might have done previously. Or in a lot of industries, people are experiencing that things just don't work as well as they used to before, say, the pandemic. I mean, travel's probably the best example of that. I mean, if you try to fly over the summer, you may have experienced that.
Yep.
So so customers are in need of support that often goes beyond the kind of standard, predictable, scriptable solutions, because it's kind of there's new things happening, but also there's that heightened sense of or lack of certainty about things, and that's where empathy really comes into play. And so we are in terms of how that is measured. Is that your question you asked me? Was how
Well, it was a bit of an open question as to how do you measure it, and how would you bring this conversation to an organisation to say how why it's important, and then how do you define and measure it?
It's important. It was important for those reasons that I've just talked about. I think it's then what we really talk to companies about at the moment is thinking holistically about their customer service offering in a way that allows things like empathy, like responsiveness, like we use words like compassion, to be not just to be nurtured and grown within that organization. So often that means, counterintuitively, there's a technology component to that, because we can use technology to better identify who a customer is, predict what their need might be, or automate the kind of the basic processes that people would otherwise spend time doing. And what that kind of gets all that stuff out of the way and automates that. What it means is that the agents, the humans that are doing the work, can spend more time being empathetic and are spending less time, wrestling with typing typing the same information into three different boxes, because there's three different systems that are not talking to each other. And so that they're really about sort of nurturing customer relationships rather than just kind of carrying out a predictable process.
So it's not only is it identifying where compassion can play a role, but it's not nurturing it, encouraging it, and then hope that producing outcomes which ultimately to do with. I mean, how would you measure it based upon things like retention or lifetime value? Is that where it's sort of playing a role?
Yeah. So in the long term, really, it is about lifetime value. And it depends on the industry, but it might be, particularly for a subscription business or this industry, it usually is going to be customer retention or customer value growth over time. If it's in retail or something like that, we'd be looking at repeat business from that customer and thinking about their just general engagement with the brand. Obviously, those things are quite hard to measure in the long term. They're quite hard to measure in the short term. They're really important to measure in the long term, but often you don't see the results of those till it's too late. We see in particular the strongest correlation in terms of things you measure in the short term are reducing the level of effort a customer has to go to get their problem solved.
Right.
The effort is in the form of time. So basic stuff like what's the waiting time before you get through, or how long once I'm through to somebody, how long do I have to wait for them to actually answer my question before they're peeing into the knowledge base or whatever. But it's also effort in terms of the kind of the emotional effort to get a problem solved, like how hard it is to actually explain what it is that they need, whether the person they're talking to or chatting with is actually responsive to that. And so it's quite it's subjective in terms of the customer's experience there, but there are specific things that you can measure on the journey that customer's gone through to get a kind of understanding of how much effort they've had to go through to get their problem resolved.
So before we go further on back into that one, Nick, 'cause I'm interested in your perspective on that one, I thought I'd ask the big open question, which is a good one to get the conversation flowing, which is, from your opinion, or even from Boston's opinion, really, which is what impact do you think the GigCX is having on the customer service industry today?
Yeah, well, I think it's that's a really good question. A big,
it is a big one.
So thanks. So let me give you a concise answer as much as possible. It is having a big impact, and I think the best way that it's having a big impact is as part of a sort of portfolio of different ways that people are seeing to serve customers that go beyond the classic model of people working in what was a call center, maybe a multi-channel contact center, still historically people working quite siloed in teams, and calls getting transferred between lots of people, all that kind of stuff, but ultimately frustration for customers. So I think where Gig comes in is it is absolutely brilliant for access to expertise. And so the being able to be quite targeted about speaking to, say, in particular, say a product specialist or a specialist on a particular process, or somebody that has walked the walk and can talk from first-hand experience about what they've done. Because I think you mentioned at the beginning, often the case is the person as the gig worker is somebody who is maybe a customer of the product. So it's access to expertise, but it's access to expertise when, typically in a contact center world, you need to be thinking about scheduling those people and having them working on shifts and having the right number of people, and then worrying about occupancy and utilization and those sorts of things. So it enables you to have expertise that might be sort of subscale if you were trying to staff a full contact center, but it's there for customers as and when they need it. And then there are kind of ways that isn't necessarily limited to servicing either. It could be for retentions, it could be for sales, maybe even collections. I don't know, all of that sort of stuff. But I think also it complements other models which are maybe not there for expertise, but they might be there for solving unusual, there's different models in the contact center as well that we're seeing. So for example, teams working more collaboratively together. I've worked with an airline that has a core team of people, quite a small team, but they spend only 60% of their time handling customer queries. They spend 40% of their time working to improve the end-to-end customer journey. They interact with the digital team to build better apps, for example. But that's that's a different sort of skill that you'll bring, or a different kind of model, but that complements the gig model, which in that world would be more for selling tickets or guiding people on great holiday destinations to go to. That's a great use of gig in that sort of world. And I think thought of as part of that kind of portfolio of different working models and different offerings to customers, it can become really powerful.
So the areas you touched on there, which I think are really, and it's brilliant when we hear this from other people, because it reinforces the sort of reason why we're here. But access to not just talent, because talent's a broad spectrum of just more the generic workforce, but specific product expertise. The flexibility there is about the second point you mentioned is about when, as opposed to somebody working on a schedule where they're being asked to work in a certain way at a certain time, because that's when we predict that the questions are going to come in. It's just the questions come in when the customers want to ask the questions, and availability is there in a very reasonable amount of time to give the answer when it suits both parties, and everyone's cool with that. And that they're the sort of two biggest areas that we see the GigCX becomes really, really attractive outside of your traditional metrics around speed of answer and cost and those sorts of things. Is actually, well, we can find people that have got genuine knowledge because they've already chosen the brand in the first place. So, de facto already some level down the road of understanding. But then secondly is this move to digital or asynchronous messaging. And I've mentioned this before on one of the other podcasts, but for me, whenever I'm in need of an answer, if I'm not asking a company, if I want to ask something of anybody, the first thing I do is I open WhatsApp. So, and I don't expect an instant answer, but I do expect an answer, and it's fine for me to be in the middle of that conversation and me not to follow up, and then it ultimately gets answered. So we're conditioned as consumers and users, if you like, in our personal lives to work in this way, to pick up a phone, to use digital, to expect an answer when it comes through, and that's cool. But when you approach companies, they're often still shepherding you down these more real-time routes, or voice, or lots of gates along the way. And that ultimately, behind the scenes, that makes things incredibly difficult for an organization to scale. to get the talent, to make sure that they're there without burning them out, that constant sort of seesaw of cost versus CSAT challenge, and to give them the feedback there. So, I mean, you touched on some amazing points and all of that. What do you think's changed in the last year in the current sort of state of GigCX? A lot's moved on, but what do you think's been the sort of main movements there in the last year or so?
Well, is it right if I give you two answers?
Yes.
Am I allowed? I'll try.
You are. Go for it.
Because I'm going to do a slightly provocative one, and then I'll do.
Oh, interesting. Go for it. Yeah.
So the provocative one, I think, is like what has changed in the gig economy over the last year, and I think what we've seen is that a lot of the kind of the pioneering gig platforms, whether that's taxi services or food delivery, they have their business model has been really challenged in the last year. Like it really was based around building a platform, often getting to kind of monopoly levels of market share, so completely disrupting an industry, often crashing the pricing in those industries in order to get in. But largely, some of that is because they've got great technology, but a lot of it is also because, frankly, a lot of venture capital money is in there helping that to work out. And in a world that's sort of fine, in a world where there's 0% interest rates, but in a world where we are now, where there's supply constraints and there's inflationary pressures and those sorts of things, those kind of models are really challenged. I think it's important to look at. I think GigCX isn't and doesn't have to suffer from those kinds of challenges. I think the economics of it are a bit different. It doesn't have to become a platform that you wouldn't say that GigCX is going to completely eliminate the need for any business process outsourcing. It doesn't really make sense that would be the long term. I mean, maybe you'll tell me that is your long term goal. I can't quite see it working like that. I think it is complementary. It's disruptive in terms of it's a new working model, but it's complementary to the rest of the industry.
Right.
And then the way there's relatively low barriers to entry for people. You don't need to have a bike or a car. You just are at home and you log in. So it's less likely to suffer from some of those kind of supply constraints or some of the the cost pressures that are affecting the rest of those industries. So I think I kind of put that sort of changed because potentially there are some challenges there, but I think actually GigCX in particular is reasonably well positioned to overcome those. I think what's happened, my second answer then is more thinking about it from a customer perspective. What I think we're seeing is much more integration of gig models into a sort of overall service offering. So I think where historically I saw gig being used in two ways when it originally came out. One is as a very discrete channel. Like if you need help with this thing, here's our gig service over here, and speak to some people. That almost evolved from user forums and those sorts of things, right. But it's a very discrete channel, separate to the rest of customer service. So it's either like that, or being used as a kind of overflow channel. So I, for example, have seen in insurance, for example, so if there's bad weather and there's insurance claims have gone through the roof, you kind of switch to the flexible gig workers to cover that. But both of those are a little bit removed from the kind of core operations. Whereas I've seen what would, definitely within the last year is more of a push towards that being integrated. So a customer will come in through a single entry point. So that might be through an app, through a chat interface, or through an IVR, and then have the opportunity, depending on their contact reason, depending on the urgency of it, the level of specialism needed, what it is that they need, whether any sort of personal information is required in order to answer the question, dynamically being routed to either a gig worker or a permanent worker in a contact center, and that potentially being completely invisible to that customer. But the point is they're just getting the right service at the right time when they need it.
Yeah. And from the, I think you've touched on a couple of points already, which is references some of the pressures today. But without putting words in your mouth, what do you think are the biggest reasons? Because we're seeing, let me set this one up properly. So we're seeing, as a provider of this service, typically engage with an organization, and once we've established what questions can be answered by a gig-based crowd, because some are not all of them are suitable, right? And some of them might require deeper systems access than we can start with. And once we've figured out what those contacts are, how we're going to route them, or for anyone listening in the US, how we're going to route them to the crowd, and then we've established what the crowd size is, then we've got a working solution, and then we set about identifying and onboarding the crowd. Now what that means is invitations are sent out, or awareness programs are created, so that customers get the opportunity of seeing, I'm already a customer of XYZ brand, and now I'm being offered the opportunity to becoming a gig-based expert or brand ambassador, as we interchange. So we receive, when we send these invitations out, we are seeing now more than ever, which is a phrase that always grates against me when I say these things, but now more than ever, we are seeing a huge uptick in those expressing interest to want to work in this way. And it is black and white difference from when we started 6 years ago to, even anecdotally, one of the customers that we had, we were supposed to, we needed to onboard about another 30 to 50 experts to handle particular new contact types that we were going to route through to the crowd, and they were helping with the onboarding. So they were sending out the emails to their customers to say, look, hey, do you want to join this program? Click here, sort of thing. And they were supposed to only send it out to about 200, 300 customers, and they inadvertently sent it out to all of their customers. And hopefully my CTO isn't listening, but our website crashed. So we had effectively like a denial of service attack, where everyone just went, come on, I want to work it this way. And it was just, we got, thankfully we've now changed some of the things that will stop that. But all that says, not only does that say, that there is no shortage of people that want to work in this way, but we are seeing a dramatic increase across all industries, not just in customer service. So that's my big tee up, which is, why do you think that we are seeing such a rise in more people that want to pursue these sorts of opportunities?
Well, yeah, I think I haven't so far in this discussion talked enough about employee experience, and I think that question is a good tee into that. Working in customer service, depending on the industry you're working in, can be a difficult job, and it has got more difficult in the last few years. There's lots of examples of customers being less accepting of what's happening, people having to, or whether they're now working from home or in a contact center, there's a lot of pressures on that job. And I think we've all seen that during the last few years. People also had a bit of a change of thinking around what their individual priorities might be, about what career means for them, about what's important for life overall. We did some research this year. We sent a survey out to about 500 people who worked in contact center in industry globally. About 300 of those were agents, and the rest were people in leadership roles. And from the agents, one of the things we asked them is, why would what would make you want to stay in your job? And the top three things were fascinating. I'm going to be frank. The top one was salary, as you might expect. But the second one was absolutely flexibility around scheduling, and not wanting to be in a world where you are you are beholden to a fixed schedule all the time. And then the third is being able to actually solve things for customers. So not having customers getting frustrated because you can't solve things for them. So you can see how add all those sorts of things up. Gig working isn't right for everybody. There's lots of people who work in a contact center and are comfortable coming in every day. They know what they're doing. They like the social aspect of it, and they're going to continue doing that. But from that survey, we're seeing a lot of people are after a lot more flexibility, but also the knowledge that the stuff that they're handling is stuff that is kind of things that are within their control to resolve. And I think a lot of those the gig programs often give offer that a bit more. I think the other thing, I mean, sorry, just very quickly, like as I sort of hinted at in my last comment, I think again where GigCX is a little different to some other gig jobs like delivery driving. There's a much lower barrier to entry for doing it. You don't have to have a bike or a car. You just need literally a phone, a smartphone, and an internet connection. But also, I think therefore, it's true flexibility. Like if you're working as a delivery driver, you're not getting paid necessarily for a lot of the time that you might be spending getting to and from the restaurant or wherever you're going, or the parcel depot. With the gig work, with GigCX, I think you're seeing a model where people can genuinely tap in and tap out, and then build that into their life, which means that the times when they're not working, they are able to do other things, whether that's other jobs, whether that's looking after children or relatives, or pursuing other interests in their lives.
I mean, you've we do a similar survey, as you know, because it's all part of the report. And one of the things we're trying to find out is what sort of who are the people? Where do they live? What are they qualifications? What do they do? That sort of stuff. And one of the things you were mentioning there around people don't want to necessarily come in. Some like coming into a contact center. We did it all those years ago, and that was fine. But there was only one option then. Whereas, but what we're seeing now is not just a case of people saying, "Well, I don't want to go into a contact center and work this way," because the demographic of the crowds of experts that work through Limitless on behalf of a number of brands fit into sort of 5 areas. So stay-at-home parents is a massive one. There's retirees, students, there's professional gig workers, as they like to call themselves, doing a multitude of different jobs. And then there is this other sort of bit of a surprise one, actually, which is commuters. So people that have already got a job, but they in their downtime from whatever they're doing, they're doing this. Now, I was remain forever curious, and I remember talking to one of the experts who was a stay-at-home parent, and it wasn't that she wanted to work in a contact center. She told me it was that she felt like when she became a parent, that was then her full-time job, and that was it. And then her ability to contribute in a world where she was used to contributing, which is in the corporate world and that stuff, it just diluted itself to being almost not even there over the time. So this gave her a means to be able to contribute again. And it was more to do with the self-worth than it was actually the monetary worth of the things that she was getting. And these were her words. And similarly with another chap who works on the Microsoft account for us, but he was a retiree, and he was just. He was like, I used to work a lot. I used to work a lot on like the forums and the communities and things like that, which is, I mean, it's 50% of what GigCX is, because when you really think about it, so everyone's come, and there's a question I'm going to eventually get to in a minute when I do my boring setup, is the community allows a mechanism digitally for people with the product know-how to come on when they want to and provide help to people in a way that suits them, and they don't want anything back from it, and they get their personal gratification out of answering questions because they've got the knowledge. And that is 50%, even probably more, to do with GigCX, because you take all of that, you monetize it by saying, well, actually now we'll reward you for your time, because that's the trade-off, which then means you can scale it and you can depend on it as a resource channel. So GigCX isn't in my humble opinion such an alien thing, because everyone's used to everyone's used to forums and communities, anyway. So this is just, kind of, adding on to all of that. And I find that aspect, massively empowering, especially for a workforce that are looking for different ways to work, looking for different ways to contribute, and that's the feedback that they give us, which is lovely to hear, and it helps them give a purpose, as well as it does helping them put money in their pocket. So in the report, you talk about how company leaders are seeing customer service as one of the best ways to drive brand engagement, loyalty, advocacy. If we answered that, is there anything more you wanted to sort of expand on within there as to why that's such an important role?
Well, there's something I'd really love to discuss with you, actually, which is like, I think we've talked a lot in this session about gig workers being sort of product fans, and finding people who are really engaged with the product. I think, in fact, let me ask, sorry if this is a cheeky question, but like, I'm keen to get your view on, do you believe that every industry, every company, let's restrict it to B2C companies rather than B2C, can find fans for their products? Do you think that there are going to be people out there that,
But this is one of the the dangerous things because the answer, you'd expect the answer for me to be yes, 100%. And all I can say honestly is, in all of the organizations that I've worked with in this environment, there has been absolutely no shortage. There has been in fact an abundance of those. So when I think about this, I'm thinking that if you're a big enough brand, and you are B2C, and depending on your business model, now there is a difference here between the business model, and what I mean by that is, you could be an organization that just sells a product on the shelf and that's it, or you could be an organization that sells a product on the shelf with some form of ongoing relationship, be it a subscription or some form of add-on or things like that. And then you get those organizations which are purely subscription only. Now, what I see is that there is more brand loyalty in those that have a subscription and a products and subscription than there is those that are sort of one-time purchases. But even that, we've seen more pressure because loyalty has become more liquid, largely due to the fact that when there's competition in those areas, you see organizations going, well, there's no contract, cancel whenever you want. So therefore you can, it's very easy for you to move around. But what the reason why they do that is because there is still a massive consortium of core customers that don't leave, and they don't leave because they like the brand and they don't want to go anywhere else, because it's frankly effort, even as much as you make it painless to move, and they're comfortable with recognizing that organization. So I think it does depend on the business model as to as the percentage shift in that. But the answer is 100% yes. In terms of any big B2C operation, we have only ever seen an oversubscription or application for those wanting to represent and be a brand ambassador. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Really interesting to know, because I mean, what I was thinking as we were talking through that is, I think you have to, maybe in some industry, you have to get quite creative about what you might define as being a fan. So like, if you're selling games consoles, it's probably quite easy to find people who, gamers, like, who are really, really into the product and can really do it. I guess if you're selling, I don't know, if you're selling margarine, like, it's, that's not a sexy product. But I'm sure that there are people who really, people who are great chefs, great cooks, who really know, would talk about it. Or if you're selling, I don't know, financial services products, like, I'm not sure there are that many people who are like fans of their banks, but there are certainly people who would take pleasure in helping other people sort out their finances. So I suppose it doesn't have to be like a brand, just a brand. Yeah. It could just be an engagement with that product category in general, or the like-minded customers, or those sorts of things.
When you say, so I guess there's a scale of a fan, right? Which is, do you want somebody to be out there on their own recommending you, like the ultimate NPS person, right? Somebody who's just constantly on their soapbox, or is it that a fan doesn't necessarily mean that they are there going, I'd buy from here, buy from here, buy from here. It's someone that can just relate. It's just I've decided to purchase this product, so I know I know the thing you've got, I know how to help you.
Mm-hmm.
That it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be the number one fan of that brand. It's about relatability, and is that, going back to the earlier point around empathy. It's just somebody can say, well, yeah, I have chosen this. The reason why they're invited to join a program like what we provide is because they're already on the customer list. They've already purchased that product, so you're not trying to convince them to buy our products, and then whilst you're here, can you also do this? It's like, well, you've already, on your own free will, you've decided to buy this thing. Great. Well, would you also like to join our program to be a brand ambassador, which means you can help answer other, and on, we whenever we do this, this is always the funny conversation we have with organizations, because maybe they may have a not too dissimilar view as to where the question came from you, which is thinking, are there enough of them out there? And if it always amuses me more than anything else when we go through these processes that there's such a plethora of people that that want to work in that way and are able to work in that way, but not in a well, if we didn't have them, then we'd have to find them another contact center. There are people here that we wouldn't have been able to get to. It's not like we are saying, well, that person who's a retiree, well, actually that's a bad example because they weren't working anyway, but a student or a stay-at-home parent and stuff, and if they weren't able to operate in this way, they would go into a contact center and still work for us anyway. They can't, because they want to work in their own free will. So it's about access to in the way in which they want to be able to work as well. And actually, there was one question I was going to ask you, which is, do you think there is a stigma associated with, say, if I said to you, I'm a GigCX worker, or I work in the gig economy, do you think there is a stigma associated with that?
That's a great question, Chris. And I think my immediate, having not really thought about that, but my immediate response would be, what you call things is always important. That's something I've learned throughout perhaps a little late in my career, actually, more when being a consultant. But how you name things really affects how people think about them. So I think there is a possibility, actually, that if there are potentially some stigmas around being called a gig worker, or it has connotations maybe of being it's low skill, it's not work that people are going to make a big career out of, I guess. But I
conversely,
think
if I said I was self-employed,
tell me what? Yeah, exactly. Like if you're a product expert, or a customer engagement expert, or those sorts of things. And I know that might sound a little bit superficial, but I think actually it changes the way that those roles are thought of, both in terms of for that person individually and their sense of the worth of that job, but also how they're perceived by the company. Like, hey, here's our team of product experts, or here's our team of customer engagement fanatics, whatever you want to call them. It changes how that team gets used, because then you can start to think about, well, this isn't just about providing reactive customer service or reactive sales to customers when they need it. We could be deploying these people to help us develop better products, or really start to understand our customers better and what motivates them, and you use that kind of insight. So I think it's maybe superficial, but I do think what you call the role is pretty important.
So Nick, that's just great. One other question I had for you, which was, if so, like you were saying there, that the role they can play and the benefit they can bring. So let's say for example, there is especially with your experience of consulting organizations and helping organizations sort of figure some of the stuff out. You're talking to people, big companies, about people, process, technology, everything, and you've got somebody who's interested in looking at this alternative model, looking at GigCX. How would you recommend they go about getting buy-in from their other company leaders?
Well, as with a lot of change in customer service, it's about being able to tell the story of the total value that is being created, or in a positive way. I think often, when I talk to customer service leaders who are all extremely dedicated to their job, very experienced, they know what they're doing, and they work extremely hard, usually work very long hours often, leading customer services, and that doesn't always leave time for thinking about bigger picture value. So often the conversation is very focused around cost. Not to say that cost isn't important, but it's certainly not the only thing to talk about, and often it's not the leading thing to talk about, especially when you're trying to influence executives in an organization or people across different functions, sales and marketing, etc. So thinking about what is the value creation opportunity within customer service, and that could be that can be like explicit value creation, like we're going to get our customer service people to sell more stuff, but often it's a bit more implicit than that. It's that we're going to create much better brand affinity, because when people speak to our associates, the people that work for us or represent us, they get a great feeling about this company. They know that this company is actually on top of things. They can solve problems for me. They make my life easy. And that's the sort of stuff that what's interesting is, you go and talk to your chief marketing officer, and they will say, she'll say that we spend millions on advertising to try and convince customers that that's what we're like. And it's like, if we spent some of that money on our operations for our customer service to actually show in real life that is what we are like, that can be a really powerful, meaningful message. So I think the short answer, and obviously the longer answer, is give me a call and we can have a workshop or something. But the short answer is think about the bigger value creation opportunity of customer service interactions, and how amongst all sorts of levers that you could pull, Gig being one of those, part of that portfolio can be part of that picture.
Yeah, well, I mean, no surprise, I'm a big supporter of that, and I was in fact the last podcast I was talking about this generational shift that GigCX provides, which is, in my simple brain, I use analogies a lot, difference between the last 30-40 years we've been driving a petrol car. It's been cost and CSAT, it's been tinkering with the engine, and then GigCX is effectively the electric car, because it's not built upon the same laws of physics. You don't have to schedule, you don't have to worry about this, and you pay per outcome and blah, blah. And I think it's fantastic. But the thing that I think it should hopefully inspire any CX leaders to want to do this is the total value creation, like you mentioned, that this can bring. Because for me, it answers the statement that I see in organizations everywhere, and it's a version of words in this sort of order, which is, we put customers at the heart of everything that we do. It's it's in the boardroom, it's on the brochure, but you put blockers in the way, you make stuff hard for them and that stuff. Now, for me, what better way of putting customers at the heart of what you do than by inviting a whole bunch of them to be your frontline customer service team to help other customers? And that's going to pay you dividends in a number of ways. Not only does it feel very honest and trustworthy, but you're also going to create a different loyalty base, because the experts that are making up to be the customers that are going to be, being your experts, they're less likely to leave as well, because not only if I bought this product on my own free will, it's also now a revenue source for me, because I'm now helping other people along their journey. So, and that multiplies, and that halo effect that you have, it is are things that can affect some of the metrics that are looked at much further down the line, more so than figuring out how you can automate another inquiry or push someone onto self-serve, that sort of thing. That's your petrol engine. That's what everyone's been trying to do for donkeys, whereas this is about people can help people in a natural way and everyone gets rewarded for it. There we go. That's me on my soapbox again. We've run out of time as per usual, so we might have to do a part 2 when we get a bit further into this. So But look, thank you for your time. Your insight is always invaluable. And like you mentioned, anybody that really wants to figure out how this can work in their business or their operation, then Nick and BCG are a fantastic business to look at this holistically from every aspect and bring it together. And for those listening, stay tuned. We all the information that we've covered off with more is all embedded within our annual gig report, which Nick's one of our major contributors to. And if you want to know any more, then just head over to our website, limitlesstech.com, and we'll be there to help you. But stay tuned, and we'll be on next, ready to dive further into GigCX. Thank you for your time. Cheers, Nick.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for listening.